Welcome to, I'm one of the educators here at the Sea Lab, and today we are going to chat with Dr. Kat Vendl, who is a veterinarian with our marine mammal research program. So she is going to talk with us about their stranding response and the research that they're doing on threats to marine mammals in our local waters, some of the causes of death that they have determined through their program, and also some of the ways that people might be able to help some of these animals. So with that, I will let Dr. Kat tell you a little bit about their research and her work.
Thanks, Vendl. Thanks for having me. And thanks everyone for being here today, and also in person. Well, I was told this is not the typical talk, so don't worry about getting bored, I hope. Anyway, so I'm desperately hoping for your questions so I don't have to talk too much on my own. As Vendl said, I'm the research veterinarian here as part of the Marine Mammal Research Lab, Marine Mammal Health Research Lab, and we also have a stranding network, the Alabama Marine Mammal Stranding Network, and we take care of about an average of about around 37 whale and dolphin strandings per year, but that's about the average. We also take care of the manatees in the region, and I always like to surprise people with the fact that everyone knows that there are manatees around here. Florida always likes to, has a bit of a monopoly on them, but that is not true. We have them too. And in increasing numbers actually, which is very exciting. So we attend to manatee strandings of around 1 to 4 per year, which is actually a good sign. That means the manatees in our area don't need as much help as the dolphins. Much easier, those ones. I thought I'd talk a bit about the threats, like Vendl said, the threats that marine mammals are facing in the waters. And by the way, in case you're wondering, I'm obviously not from here. I'm German originally, and I like to maintain a bit of an Australian accent as well, because I spent 7 years in Sydney, Australia. I'm a bit worried it's getting lost, but so far my southern accent is not quite there yet, as you can tell. Anyway, so what are the threats of marine mammals in these waters? So they're definitely multiple. So we have kind of very much encroached on the marine habitat, and we have a pretty large, basically resident dolphin population in our waters. They even live in Mobile Bay in parts of the year, which means that there is definitely a lot of I would say close proximity between the habitat of the dolphins and our habitat, where we work, live, and do recreational activities. So one of the main threats of the marine mammals, especially dolphins and manatees in our area, is definitely human interactions. And I'm sure you've probably all, or most of you, have seen dolphins in the area. Have you seen dolphins? Yes. So sometimes you can't really avoid them in these waters, which is amazing. So I've done a bit of kayaking around here. I'm fairly new. I only started last May, so I'm not quite a local yet. But basically every time I go kayaking, they pop up right in first. At first you sometimes get a bit of a shock and it's like, shark, but no, it's just a dolphin. So it's quite fun. But that also means it's really fun to see them up close, right? But it's also a big risk, mostly for the dolphins and the manatees, because boat strikes are common in our waters. Dolphins are very agile creatures, but boats can be very fast, as we know. So sometimes, sometimes it happens that they get hit by a boat, and we actually have a little prop prepared. Asita, would you mind, my lovely assistant Asita here, one of our master students in the lab, broken rib next to the skull, please. Yes, lovely, yes. Thank you. So just to, kind of show, it leaves visible marks. So this is one of the ribs of a manatee that was hit in Mobile Bay, and see being hit by a boat actually led to a completely broken rib. So it's quite impressive. These are very solid, but being hit by a boat leaves these marks.
Was that the cause of death for this manatee?
Oh,
Could you tell?
that is a very good question. It was not one of my patients.
Is it okay to?
Yeah, of course, please. Yeah, just careful, but I'm sure you know that. It's heavier than you think, but I'm not sure. I will refer this question to our stranding coordinator who is present today. Mackenzie, what is there any others? Fishery interactions are very common as well. So there's a very vibrant fishery industry in our waters for, I'm sure many of you are recreational fishermen yourself, or women, and which is great. It's great fun, but it also is a major risk for our marine mammals, especially the dolphin. So it is it's not uncommon that they either get entangled in fishing gear, which is often it floats around. It's called ghost nets. So then they can get tangled in those nets, drag them behind them, and either it causes long-term damages, or they can. It happens that they regularly drown in those fishing nets as well. So we have it on a quite regular basis that especially healthy males. Like healthy male dolphins are suspected to die not uncommonly of entanglement in fishing nets and die of that. I say it is likely that that's the cause of death in a lot of them because it's actually quite a tricky thing. So we, the strandings, we tend to, when the animals are dead, which is most of the time the case, we bring them to our necropsy lab and do a thorough necropsy on them. And dying or like death by drowning is actually really hard to tell. So that's why often we have to use small hints that tell us, give us a good idea of that they might have drowned, but it's not fully sure.
You just mentioned, I just want to go back to that for a second. You just mentioned that that was that you commonly saw that in healthy males.
Yes.
So could you elaborate on that?
I should be a bit cautious here, and this is also political, males being less cautious and all that. But and often science, and I really want to point this out because it's really important to know, like science, well, is an accurate thing, but it's also often really hard to get solid evidence, right? And I feel like everyone in every member of the public is probably aware of that since the pandemic, especially that we do research every day, always, but it doesn't mean we always know all the answers. And often it's really hard to get a definite answer because the world is really complicated, and we try our best, but often the world is more complicated than our brains can comprehend, and we have to do that as well. So that's why I like to say this is what our conclusions, but often we do not know for sure.
And there's some social dynamics with the males that
Thanks for bringing me back to that, because I totally forgot about that point. Yes, so we do find more males which are suspected to have drowned. There is a bit of a suspicion that they might be a bit bolder than the females, which makes sense because a lot of the times the females would have a calf in tow, and all mothers know that. You do not want to put your calf at risk. So you might want to engage with risky activities a bit less than if you're a strong male and you think you're invincible. So that is at least a suspicion why males tend to die in fishing nets more commonly. Again, I say this with caution, but it seems to be a thing. Fisheries interactions very common, and I did mention, and you mentioned that in the kind of intro to the talk, what can we do, what can everyone do? A lot of the things are not necessarily in our hands what we can do, like most of the dolphins that die or drown would drown in commercial fishing nets, so most of you are not commercial fishermen or women, so I guess not really something you can do directly. And one of the is, which seems quite simple, but it's illegal to feed dolphins, which is a bit of a bummer because it would be so much fun, right? But by feeding them, you actually make them get used to boats, make them get used to being close to people, being close to boats, and that teaches the dolphins, oh, people and boats are fun and maybe food, but that also means they're more likely to be hit by boats, more likely to get close to humans. And some people, it doesn't happen often, but there's also sometimes people harm marine mammals on purpose for whatever weird reasons, and the more dolphins and other marine mammals are used to humans, the more likely this is to happen. So that's why what you can do is definitely just stick to the laws. Basically, don't feed them, don't get too close to them, don't on purpose swim with them. Because then they learn we are friends, and unfortunately we are not always friends to them, although we were, but not always. Yeah, so those are, I would say, it's a little overview of the human interactions that can harm and threat. There are definitely more I forgot about, but a little overview. And then there are many other threats, which are quite interesting as well. So dolphins and other marine mammals are incredible creatures. As you all know, they have adapted to marine life really well. One of the adaptations, Asita, my assistant, can you please one of those cannons. Still not used to it. Please, not right now. We're busy. Thank you. So we have a dolphin skull right here. Ooh, trying to put this together. Thank you. So has the lovely teeth. They have a lot of teeth, which is quite impressive. And what I want to point out here, interesting features on this dolphin skull, but one of the interesting ones is, as everyone knows, dolphins have a blowhole. And they're basically like our nostrils, or they're basically like our nose, right? So you see those two nostrils, or like openings for the nostrils right here. But do dolphins have two blowholes? No, they only have one. Weird. But they actually fuse, or like basically come together and then open up on the top of the dolphin's head as one. And this is obviously, everyone knows that, one of the adaptations of whales and dolphins, which is really cool. We have to use a snorkel for that, right, to be that efficient. But it also comes with quite a few downsides, personally. So they're very respiratory actions. So really, of dolphins we see and we find on our necropsy tables have some kind of pathological change of their lungs. Most of the time it's not the cause of death. Most of the time it's just like an underlying issue, like some of us might have asthma or like a little cough every now and then, so it's usually not too bad, but it can develop into pneumonia and then they can die of it. And the reason why they're so prone to it is, believe that so again, they have a blowhole on the top of the head, and that means they inhale the air at the very, like basically at the, how do you call that? Well, at the side, and accumulate on the surface of the water. So that means they're really close to that, and they breathe in a lot of that stuff, which is not ideal for them to breathe in. In addition to that, they also have a massive air or gas rate. So they can, within about a third of a second, they can exchange of their in the lungs. And we don't even have, like, I looked this up when you want to compare it. A galloping horse has about 27% of gas exchange for one breath. So that means there is a massive gas exchange happening really fast, which means they basically inhale, like suck in all the air really quick. And that also has quite a bit of nasty stuff in it, like bacteria, viruses, floating on the surface of the ocean. And
is this a functional? Is the functional advantage to this that they get that full oxygenation because they then go underwater and they'll be holding their breath?
Exactly, that's the point. So it is the adaptation to diving, to the fact that they want to spend as little time on the surface as possible, because well, time is not money for them, but time can be the fish that they could catch and hunt when they're not breathing on the surface. So yes, it's really important to them to minimize surface time, but this comes with the cost that I'm really fascinated, and in our lifetime we will never know, but I wonder, maybe in a few million years dolphins will be totally we always keep evolving, so I wonder if maybe in a million years dolphins and whales are even more adapted, and maybe they have a little snorkel on top of their head, so they don't have to breathe directly from that transition between water and air. Who knows? Could be interesting.
Do you find that there are differences among species or among individuals, like if they surface and they just sort of clear that interface more and
oh, that's a really good
don't
question.
inhale the, if some of them, either some species or different species different individuals with their species?
That's a really good question. I have to say, me personally, I done enough observations to be able to tell. So only people who have spent hours and hours in the field would be able to answer that question. It's possible, but I don't know.
That would be a difficult research question to answer, I imagine.
Definitely, yeah. But there are probably people who look into that. There are always some people out there. Yeah, another thing we probably find quite gross is that it's very common for them to have lungworms, so lung parasites that we find in almost every dolphin that we examine. Again, yeah, for us pretty gross. We don't want to imagine having having worms in our lungs, but for them it's really common. And it's also interesting in a parasite load, whereas us as modern humans, we do not want to have parasites unless we want to lose weight and want a tapeworm, but that's a very different story. So dolphins do not want to lose weight by having a tapeworm. So in wildlife, even a healthy individual, they would still often have a certain level of parasite load, which most of the time is not a problem for them. But we do find that, and it can be a sign. If we find a lot of those parasites in one dolphin, it can be a sign that something else is not going right in this dolphin. Like there might be pneumonia, either because sites or because of a bacterial infection, and the worms just take advantage of it, and they're like, ooh, this is the ideal habitat now. Let's reproduce even faster. So that can happen.
Have you noticed over the years an increase or a decrease in this?
In the prevalence of lungworms? That's a really good question you're asking, actually. So I'm not sure if everyone heard that. So the question is if there's an increase in prevalence, which means do more dolphins have more worms or have they had more worms in the last few years? I want to say, because I've only been here since last year, but I know that everyone has heard of the Deepwater Horizon, what's the word again?
Oil spill?
Thank you. The massive oil spill that happened in 2010, 2010 massive oil spill that influenced the entire ecosystem of the Gulf of Mexico, right? Especially the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico. There were lots of studies looking into the long-term consequences of that, and it takes, the estimation is that it takes about 30 years for those long-term consequences to actually cease to exist. So we are still basically in the aftermaths of this, although it has been more than 10 years now. And there is actually some evidence that it seems like the dolphins are having more of those worms and more lung infections.
If you think about the way the oil interacts with water, the oil is going to be at the surface of the water. This is, one of the reasons that the dispersants were applied, and that would cause the oil to sink. But also oil will go through an aging process, and it will sink, and eventually some of the gases that are in it will gas off, and it ages into something that's kind of like asphalt. It sinks, but at least initially the oil is at the surface, where animals that they either live near the surface, like plankton communities, including a lot of larval animals, are near the surface, or animals that need to surface to breathe, like dolphins, sea turtles, or seabirds that land on the water surface. So a lot of different groups came into contact with that oil there at the surface.
Yeah, exactly, which brings us back to that issue, right, of being adapted to breathing very close to the surface. If there's oil, not good. Exactly. Then another aspect I want to mention about threats or hardships that the local dolphin population lives with. We're actually basically in the middle, or maybe at the beginning of the calving season of the dolphins here around Dauphin Island and in Mobile Bay, which is very exciting time for the dolphins and for us when we see them out in the wild. But it is very common during this time that we get quite a few strandings of newborn calves, sometimes even aborted calves, which is, of course, in our understanding, very sad, and I'm sure it is sad for the dolphin mothers as well, but it's also a natural part, or it's basically part of nature, because in pretty much every wildlife species, newborn mortality is really high, and it's only due to our modern medicine that we make sure that babies and babies in our case don't die as babies, but with the dolphins it's very common that calves that died because they were too weak. Maybe there was an infection in the womb. There's bacteria as well. There's one called brucella. If the lucky, the mother can even die of that as well. And very interestingly, brucella is one of those bacteria which is a zoonosis, which means it can infect well. So that's one of the reasons why us as responders in a the moment.
I think we're reconnected.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So, I mean, you can correct me if I'm mistaken, but to Alabama, last spring, and so you have cetaceans here, but also manatees. So, could you talk a little bit about the differences in kind of the response to manatees, maybe some of the ways from your perspective as a veterinarian that treating them is different, some of the different challenges associated with manatees?
Yeah, back to that, if I forget, that reminds me of one other thing I want to talk about in dolphins, and then we get back to the manatee. Also, especially around this area, have pretty high levels of pollutants. There's a whole cocktail of different pollutants. You've probably all heard about it. A very emerging one and popular one in the media at the moment is PFAS, which I've done some work on. So it's a dear topic to me in a way. I just want to point out this is also something that the local marine mammals have to deal with. Often with those contaminants, it's not that they get exposed and they die straight away, because it's usually long acting, so it can, for example, impact the immune system, which can mean that they get sick easier or quicker. And
could you tell some of the sources of those, the PFAs, the PFAS,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, I'm not an expert, but usually, so Mobile Bay, the Mobile Delta, you guys probably know this way better than me, but it's like basically everything that comes down from the rivers. So that includes the whole human crop, right? We have pesticides, we have fertilizers, we have sewage, we have outflow from all kinds of industrial plants. So that just makes for quite a good cocktail. That our marine mammals have to deal with. Especially PFAS is quite interesting. I can talk about that for hours, but we have to get back to the manatees. So PFAS is actually something, once you start looking into it, you won't stop reading it about it, because there's so much. It's basically in almost every household item we use. Starts with Teflon frying pans. So the reason why it is non-stick is because there is a layer of chemicals on it, which is great because it means it's no stick, but it's also not great because if it has scratches, then it can get into your food, into your fish or your steak that you fry on there, and then you ingest it. And that it's also in firefighting foams and in lots of other, again, household items, and that can be just washed in our into our waterways eventually.
So I think a lot of people, they don't really understand the way municipal water supplies work, and
don't worry.
Think of it as like a closed system where it's just cycling through, but they can escape. What we flush down our drains can escape into, some of these systems do, they are connected to natural waterways, and so they can escape into natural waterways, whether that's, people flushing medications or just our clothing or our pots and pans shedding these molecules, and it getting flushed down our drains. They can get into the environment through those routes.
Yeah, and there certainly is water is being treated, right, in water treatment plants, but at this point it's always a matter of technology as well, but not everything can get filtered out at this point. Research ongoing. Yeah, so back to the manatees, unless anyone has a question here. Okay, manatees are amazing. Who has seen a manatee in Alabama waters? Nice. Oh, nice. Cool. So 2 people. That's a good start. Yeah. So it's really interesting with the manatees. So first, before I talk about treatment, how they differ, I'm going to give a little overview. What are they doing here? Well, they never told us, but what we figured so far.
I'll move this, and you can step into the shade a little bit. The sun's moving on
I
us.
appreciate that. Yeah, so what usually happens is they have to spend their winters in Florida. There's nothing we can do about it. Florida is pretty nice. So manatees, again, look very sturdy, but they are actually incredibly, let's say, sensitive creatures, especially when it comes to temperature. That's one reason why I like them so much. I can sympathize with them there. They cannot tolerate temperatures below 68 degrees for too long. Even a few days starts stressing them out. If they're exposed to those cold waters for even longer, they go into a state which is called cold stress syndrome. That means that because it's called a syndrome, that means it comes with a whole lot of symptoms. Their gut shuts down, they can't really digest food anymore, they get really lethargic. Well, you can imagine, right? They don't have a lot of energy left because they need to try to keep like basically the inner core warm. They try to keep all the organs going, the immune system going. That takes a lot of energy, but that is impacted by the cold water. So they basically shut down as much as they can, which means sometimes in winter, if you see a manatee that didn't make it back to Florida in time, you see them often just logging around, just hanging on the surface, looking not happy. Which also impacts their skin. They often get skin lesions. It becomes kind of, it's a bit hard to describe, but the skin can get paler, so they lose pigments in the skin, and yeah, they just do not look like a happy, healthy animal anymore. If they don't get help, if they don't find enough energy to move into warmer waters, or if they don't get help by people, that's part of our job to, if someone reports such a manatee, to try to help them and try to get it into rehab. If that doesn't happen, they die.
So they're so big, and I think, because we know that they're mammals, we kind of compare them to some other marine mammals that have blubber, but their body fat is not really the same as the blubber of other
Exactly, that's a really
mammals,
good
right?
point, Vendl, and it took me a while to wrap my head around this because, yeah, exactly, when you see a manatee, most of them look really fat, so you're like, you have a lot of fat, why isn't this working? Well, yes, because they don't actually have this blubber layer that dolphins or seals have that keeps them warm. They're really dependent on warm temperatures, so that's a really good point. So that's one of the issues manatees face here. So ideally, if they're doing well, they spend the winter in Florida in the springs there, which have around 68 to 72 degrees year round, which I find really cool because that means evolutionary, the manatees have adapted to the temperatures of the springs, which, yeah, I find quite amazing. If they don't make it into the springs in time, it gets cold, they might run into trouble. But during the summer, a lot of the population from Florida actually travels back along the shores, the coast of the northern Gulf of Mexico, along our coastline. Some even go further into Mississippi, into Louisiana, into Texas even. So we have a few animals, so we have a team that tracks them, that puts tags, thank you, tags on them, which can look a bit funny. If you haven't seen it, it looks like
Kind of like a fishing float.
a little bit, yes. So it has been compared to those crab pots, right? It has been compared to crab pots, which can be an issue because some people think, oh no, they're entangled, we need to help them. If you feel like you see an animal, a manatee in distress, always call us. That's what we're here for. We will go or send someone to monitor it. If it's not a crab pot, but it's just a tag, then happy us, happy manatee, but we're glad we checked on them. So we basically study their migration patterns, and that's how we know where they go.
And just to reassure people, those tags break away if they get entangled. So they have several breakaway points. So if the tag were to get tangled in something, it would break.
That's a really good point because it basically bobs behind them, and this is something only possible because they are most of the time fairly, I wouldn't call them lethargic, that would be a bit mean, but fairly slow animals. I don't think you can ever attach that to a dolphin. It would be gone in no time. So yeah. So that's a really good point. Yeah, and then during the summer or in like spring, late spring, they migrate along the coast. That's where they also do their mating, and then at the end of summer and autumn they move back towards Florida and back into the springs. But on that long migration, if they're unlucky, and it will happen, they come across a lot of human activity. Again, boat strikes, we talked about it. That's with manatees. I'm sure you've all seen it on pictures. There are a lot of manatees who have the most ghastly scars on their backs, and it's just amazing. Oh, I like to hug it, but thank you. Yeah, it's just amazing what they can survive. So most wildlife species are incredibly hardy, really, and I feel like modern life is great, but it has also, I would say, spoiled us quite a bit, right? When we have something that hurts, we go to see a doctor to fix us, ideally, but wild animals can't do that. So they also can't complain to anyone. No one will listen to them. So they just live with it and they survive incredible things. So yeah, that's just something I like to keep in mind because it's amazing. They often hide those conditions that they're actually really unwell, which can sometimes make it difficult for us to, as the responders, as part of the network, to assess, is this animal in distress or is it just playing? Or it can be tricky because they don't want to show us that they're sick. Otherwise a shark might notice as well and then they get eaten. So it's very tricky to work with wildlife. That's why we love working with wildlife. Other people just find it a pain, but oh well.
About what is the population, what's the estimated population of manatees? So the research from this program has shown that there are some manatees that return to Alabama waters from year to year, so we might consider them to be seasonal residents. So about what population do we have?
That's a really good question, and we do not have our manatee expert Elizabeth Heap with us today, but maybe, because I do not know the number by heart.
Roughly? 30 to 50. 30 to 50?
But with increasing trend, right? From what I figured, yes. Which is really interesting, and from what I figured, it is not 100% sure what the reason for that is, why it is increasing. I mean, we love it, it's great. But we don't know, is it because the population is still recovering, because the population was down quite a bit, it is still a threatened species, so they're slowly recovering with all the conservation measures in place. So is that why we see more of them here? Or is it also because of climate change, the water gets warmer, so they can spend more time migrating compared to maybe a few decades ago? We are not fully sure about that.
So you mentioned that you all respond to an average of 4 manatee strandings per year, and most of those or maybe they wouldn't be strandings in the same way that people associate with like dolphin strandings, but respond to them in distress, and most of that is cold stress. Have you determined a reason why they would kind of linger past the point when they would do better to depart for warmer waters in Florida?
That's a really good question, and that is that's a question we wonder about a lot and try to find the answer to. We definitely haven't found the answer to yet. There are several hypotheses. One is you might have heard of harmful algal blooms, which are very common in Florida, especially on the along the coast of Florida. We get them every now and then as well, but not as much. I assume because our waters are not as warm. But again, they're very common, and those algae produce a toxin which can be really devastating for most marine species, including manatees. It basically paralyzes them, and they often drown because they can't keep their head up. And so that's what happens in Florida quite frequently during those harmful algal blooms. But what happens as well is that the animals that don't die from it, they still carry those toxins in their body. And we hypothesize that it might have long-term effects on their neurological system, which is just their brain. So maybe it impacts them to make not as smart decisions as they would usually Then I'm also an instructor summer courses that happen here at the Sea Lab. So I teach the marine mammal health and stranding response course. That's really good fun as well. And I'm lucky because most people love marine mammals. So it's much easier than for other courses to motivate the students to be interested. So I love that. And I also love the research. Research can be quite tedious sometimes. Like I said before, sometimes you spend years on a question and try to find out the answer, and after all those years you might find like a little part of the answer but never the whole picture. That can be really frustrating, but it is also fun if you do find a bigger piece of the answer every now and then.
Well, do you have any cases that were particularly interesting from this past the time you've been here?
Yeah, very good question. So yes, there's definitely one case close to my heart. It was, well, very sad for the dolphin, but no human impact for change, so we can all relax. In this case, it was again a very healthy looking male dolphin in very good body condition. He was at the prime of his life, which makes it definitely very sad, but he had an interaction with a stingray, and we all know stingrays, that's what they're named for. They have a stinger, like a barb attached to the basis of their tail, and if dolphins, it's not uncommon, if dolphins are not cautious, sometimes they try to chase stingrays for fun. Sometimes they might try to take a bite out of them, so they hunt them for food, or sometimes they just kind of get too close to them accidentally, and this is what happened to that dolphin, and it actually got barbed, and the barb ended up in its heart, and so that's what it died of straight away, which again was sad, but it was really interesting to see that, because it doesn't happen very often that you open up a dolphin and do the necropsy and then you find a very clear answer what it died of straight away. So as a researcher and scientist, it was a very interesting case.
And what would you kind of like to leave folks with as kind of the big picture message?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, first of all, I always love, and that's what I'm trying to do while I'm talking anyway, to get the message across how cool it is and how grateful I am to live in a place where you have marine mammals around you. I mentioned to you before, I'm originally from Berlin in Germany. There's no ocean nearby at all, so no marine mammals they are a long way away, and I just love living in a place where you have those dolphins and sometimes other whales and manatees that pass our coastline. It's just really cool, and I wish everyone would really appreciate it and enjoy it if that's something they're interested in. Yeah, so that's definitely part of the message. I think as scientists and researchers, part of our nature is to always be amazed by everything we see. I think that's the definition of nerdiness, but it's okay. Yeah, just that's what I love. Otherwise, I think I also would like people to be really aware that we are sharing this habitat with the dolphins and other marine mammals. We're never alone. Even if we don't see them, they might still be there, especially with the manatees in our waters. The waters here in Mobile Bay is very murky, which means often there might be a manatee right underneath your boat and you would not see it. You might still hit it, but you will never know if it doesn't come up to the surface. So that's something just to be aware that whatever you do in your boat, if you're lucky to have a boat, then yeah, just keep in mind that we are not alone and we share our habitat.
For those of you who are here, feel free after we say goodbye on the recording to linger and take a closer look at some of the artifacts that Dr. Kat has brought.
Definitely, and for everyone who's here, we also have a few flyers for you. We also have some kitchen magnets with our Stranding hotline on it, but they're also really pretty kitchen magnets, so feel free to grab one. And yeah, and of course also the overall message, if you live in the area, if you live along the Alabama coastline, if you see a marine mammal in distress, please call us and we will help.
Can we put that number up for anybody who's watching?
That's a very good point.
We can add it. And
sure.
I'll show you. So interestingly, but there was a real, a lot of time recreating on the water, work on the water, there were stories about manatees in this area, but nobody was collecting the information into kind of a central clearinghouse. They might get reported to Fish and Wildlife, but with the reporting network, they have a small research team, so they can't be out on the water, scouring the water for these manatees all the time. So they depend on the citizens who are out on the water to be kind of eyes out in the environment. And so they have become a clearinghouse for this information, these sightings. And so they've learned an incredible amount of information about the manatee population in Alabama. And with the advent of technology, everybody's carrying a cell phone around with them. They can take photos so that the researchers can assign like a confidence level to whether that was indeed a manatee or whether they might possibly have seen something else. The folks can call them right away with that cell phone technology, and they may be able to respond to that by going and confirming, or if the animal is in distress, they can respond to that. But this to the research. So
thank you, Vendl. And yes, I can add to that. Definitely, I haven't mentioned the manatee sighting network before. That's right. I only mentioned before if you see a marine mammal in distress, call us. But it is also if you see a manatee that is not in distress, please call, email, or there are other ways to get in touch. The manatee manatee
sighting network.
The sighting network, thank you very much, exactly, because you described it beautifully. This is part of our research. We study where they go, how many we have in the area, what they do, how they spend their time, and we need citizen scientists to help us with that work. That's a really good point. Yeah.
So if you spend time in our local waters, please make note of the hotline to call and report if you have, if you ever see manatees or marine mammals in distress. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.